Every nation on Earth owes someone. The U.S. alone carries more than $38 trillion in debt, the biggest number in its history. Europe sits on roughly $14 trillion, Japan on $9 trillion, and even wealthy oil producers like Saudi Arabia or export giants like Germany and China are deep in the red. Here's the strange part. If everyone owes money, who's actually owed? Welcome to Money Trap Channel, where we dig into how the world's financial machine really works. Because in this system, debt isn't just a problem. It's the blueprint of modern civilization. Every war, every crash, every recovery sits on top of invisible layers of IOUs. And if you trace those layers far enough, you'll realize something wild. The world doesn't owe money to anyone else. It owes it to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone wins from it. Some do, most don't. To understand how we got here, a planet buried under $315 trillion of total debt, nearly 3 times bigger than the global economy itself, we have to go back. Long before credit cards, digital banks, or Wall Street ever existed. The birth of debt in the late 1600s, England was broke. It was at war with France and running out of gold. The king turned to rich merchants for help, in exchange for steady interest payments backed by future taxes. That deal gave birth to something new, the national debt. And to manage it, they built the Bank of England. That changed everything. For the first time, a government could spend money it didn't yet have. And those who lent to it got something more valuable than gold, a government promise that could be traded, bought, or sold. That was the birth of the bond market, the root of the financial world we live in. France copied the idea. The Netherlands made it better. The young United States used it to fund its revolution and then to expand west. Before long, being in debt wasn't a sign of weakness. It became a badge of power. Because the more a nation could borrow, the more it could rule. Empires once conquered land to steal gold. Now they issued bonds to collect interest. The battlefield had moved from land to ledgers. The age of global debt fast forward 300 years. Debt is now the world's biggest export. The U.S. owes $38 trillion. Japan owes over $9 trillion. And every 100 days, the world borrows another $1 trillion. Every country owes. Every bank lends. Every person, through taxes, savings, or pensions, plays both roles at once, debtor and creditor. But who's holding the other end of the rope? Let's start with America. Its debt isn't just national. It's global. About half of that $38 trillion is held by investors, not government agencies. Roughly 2/3 of those investors are American. Banks, pension funds, mutual funds, and even the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining 1/3, about $9 trillion, belongs to foreign holders. Japan holds about $1 trillion. China, about $800 billion. Then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium follow. So yes, when people say America owes China, they're not wrong, but it's only around 2% of the total. The truth is, most of America's debt is owed to America. The Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, printing new dollars to do it. Taxes pay the interest on those bonds, and that money flows right back into U.S. retirement accounts. It's a perfect circle. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly a reflection in the same mirror. And this mirror doesn't just exist in the U. It's everywhere. Japan buys U.S. bonds. The U.S. funds Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank.
Those developing nations then park their savings back into U.S. bonds.
It's a global loop, a giant hot potato made of promises. Every country holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is backed by another promise. It's like a poker game where everyone is betting borrowed chips, and the only rule keeping the game alive is that no one walks away from the table. The invisible power behind it. But behind every government bond lies a fourth layer: the markets themselves. Hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks together manage tens of trillions. They are the ones who truly decide who can borrow cheaply and who must pay a high price to survive. When they lose confidence, currencies fall, governments collapse, and economies can be rewritten overnight. Elections decide who governs. Markets decide who stays alive. And at the center of it all sit the central banks, the modern high priest of finance. They don't just manage debt. They create it. When the Federal Reserve or European Central Bank buys government bonds, they aren't just investing. They're printing new money in exchange. Every dollar in circulation represents someone else's debt. There's no such thing as money that isn't tied to a promise. Every coin, every note, every digital dollar carries an invisible IOU. The world in debt. For decades, this global loop has kept itself alive through one thing: trust. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if they never touch the principal, the machine keeps spinning. But when that trust cracks, things fall apart fast. We've seen it before. In Greece 2010, the government's debt grew too big to handle. Investors panicked. Bond prices crashed. Yields exploded. The European Central Bank and IMF stepped in with a rescue. But that rescue came with pain. Higher taxes, deep spending cuts, and years of job losses. For a whole generation, the word bailout started to mean sacrifice. In Argentina, the story repeated again and again. Default after default turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, the country ran out of foreign currency to pay its loans. The result? Empty fuel stations, blackouts, and political collapse. Every time the system breaks, the real power becomes visible. You start to see the faces behind the curtain. The IMF, the credit rating agencies, the big anonymous bondholders who can choke an entire country with a single downgrade. And yet, every time it crashes, it restarts. New loans replace the old ones. Old debts get restructured. The machine resets with a different name on the same balance sheet. That's because, in today's world, debt isn't meant to be repaid. It's meant to be rolled over. The never-ending loan. Governments don't plan to pay off their debt. Not now, not ever. That's not a conspiracy. That's the policy. When you or I take a loan, we're supposed to pay it back. Governments? They refinance it. They issue new bonds to pay for the old ones. Economists call it refinancing, but in reality, it's just kicking the can forward. The interest becomes the real product, the rent you pay to keep the system steady. The global economy now depends on that rent like a shark depends on swimming to breathe. The United States will never clear its $38 trillion tab. It will just roll it forward, forever. Japan has been doing the same for decades. Its debt is now more than 250% of its GDP. Yet investors still treat Japanese bonds as safe as ever. No one expects repayment anymore. They just expect renewal. Why? Because government debt has become the safest collateral on earth. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't seen as a burden. It's an asset. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as security. Central banks treat it like cash. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt, because if they did, global finance would lose its foundation. The debt paradox. Imagine if Washington suddenly paid off every single dollar it owed. Banks and funds worldwide would lose their most stable asset. The dollar supply would shrink overnight. Markets would crash. Paying off the debt would actually destroy the economy. So instead, governments do the opposite. They keep borrowing, not recklessly, but rhythmically. Debt becomes a heartbeat, pulsing through every mortgage, pension, and market on the planet. That is why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying down the national debt, it's theater. The real goal isn't zero debt. It's sustainable debt, the kind that keeps the illusion alive. As long as investors believe in the system, the numbers don't matter. If that belief fades, everything stops. Confidence collapses. Interest rates explode. And the economy, built entirely on rolling promises, grinds to a halt. The truth about sovereign debt, that's the real secret. The plan was never to pay it all back. The plan is to keep everyone believing that one day it could be paid back. It's a closed loop of trust. And while that trust holds, the numbers can stretch to infinity. But here's the thing. The trust isn't shared equally. When people say, we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest payments don't flow evenly across society. They move upward, from taxpayers and workers to the investors and institutions who hold the debt. Debt doesn't just shift money between countries. It shifts power between classes. That's why inequality and indebtedness always rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who pay it. And that, right there, is the biggest trap of all. Because debt isn't evil. It's just how the modern world works, until the trust holding it together finally breaks. When borrowing can't keep up with promises, the question, who's the creditor, stops being theoretical and starts being personal. Because at the top of this pyramid, there's no single villain. It's not China. It's not Wall Street. It's not the IMF. It's all of them and us. The global system has turned debt into money itself. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it. And we citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred completely. Debt once meant slavery. Now, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, if confidence finally snaps, the illusion ends. And we'll remember what debt truly is. A promise that can't last forever. The price of trust, when we say the world owes money to itself, that's not the full story. Because the truth is, not everyone profits from that debt. Interest payments don't flow evenly. They move upward, from the people who work, pay taxes, and save, to the people and institutions who own the debt. Debt is not just about numbers between countries. It's about power between classes. Every time a government pays interest, that money doesn't disappear. It goes straight into the accounts of investors, funds, and banks who hold the bonds. So when politicians talk about national debt, what they really mean is your taxes, funding their promises and someone else's profits. And that's why global inequality keeps growing alongside global debt. The system is built to reward those who lend and penalize those who borrow. If you own the debt, you own the game. If you pay it, you play for survival. This doesn't mean there's a villain sitting on top of the pyramid. There's no single mastermind. It's not just China. It's not just Wall Street. It's not just the IMF. It's the system itself, a web that connects every one of us. Governments issue debt. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it, and ordinary people live by it. The line between debtor and creditor has almost vanished. Debt used to mean slavery. Now, it's stability. But that balance only lasts as long as people believe in it. Because once faith breaks, the whole illusion falls apart. If confidence disappears, currencies crash, governments fall, and the promise that everything will be fine turns into, how did it all collapse so fast? We've seen it before in Greece, in Argentina, in Sri Lanka. Each time, the story repeats. The lenders vanish from view while the people pay the price. And yet, every collapse is followed by the same ritual. New loans, new terms, new headlines. But the same story, written in a different language. Because in the modern world, debt was never meant to be repaid. It was designed to be renewed, again and again. That's not a conspiracy. That's how the system survives. Governments roll over old debt with new bonds. Banks treat debt as money. And investors depend on that illusion staying alive, because if it dies, everything else does too. So what's the real secret of the modern economy? It's not production. It's not innovation. It's trust. Trust that money means something. Trust that the system still works. Trust that someone, somewhere, will always pay. And as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch to infinity. But remember, trust isn't shared equally. Some people earn from it. Most people pay for it. And the longer this machine runs, the more it separates those two worlds. The rich don't just own assets. They own the debt that powers everyone else's life. That's how control is built. Quietly, legally, systematically. The global debt machine isn't a monster hiding in the dark. It's right in front of us, in every paycheck, every loan, every budget meeting, every headline. And when that system finally hits its limit, the question won't be, who do we owe? It'll be, who owns us? This is Money Trap Channel, where we break down the hidden mechanics of money, power, and control. Because if you don't understand how the system traps others, you might already be caught inside it. Subscribe and learn how to play the game before it plays you.